Deep inside a cave in France, past a narrow crawl space no wider than your shoulders, in total darkness, someone 30,000 years ago crouched down and painted a horse. No one would see it again for millennia. Not a person walking by. Not a family gathered around a fire. No one at all. To reach that horse, you'd need to crawl on your stomach through solid rock for nearly half a mile, carrying a flickering torch that could go out at any moment, in a space so tight you could barely turn your head. So here's the question that should bother you. If you were painting for an audience, why would you paint somewhere no audience could ever go? We've called cave paintings art for over a century, but the deeper researchers dig into where these paintings actually are and how they were made, the less that word seems to fit. Let's start with the location, because it's the detail that breaks the whole story we've been told. The Chauvet cave in southern France contains some of the oldest paintings ever discovered, dated to roughly 30,000 to 32,000 years ago. Stunning horses, lions, rhinos, painted with a level of skill that surprised even the archaeologists who found them. When explorers first entered Chauvet in 1994, squeezing through a narrow gap in a cliff face that had been sealed by a rockfall for over 20,000 years, they described the air itself as still, untouched, exactly as it had been left. No footprints but the ones they made. No sign that a single human being had entered since the last painter walked out. But Chauvet isn't unique because of the paintings alone. It's unique because of where they are. Many of the most detailed, most carefully rendered images in painted caves across Europe are located in the deepest, hardest to reach chambers, not near the entrance where daylight reaches and people would naturally gather, deep inside, past tight passages, past sections where you'd have to crawl, sometimes past all but vertical drops that required ropes or handholds cut into the rock. At Lascaux, some of the most famous paintings are in a chamber accessible only through a narrow shaft. At Rouffignac, some images are found over 2/3 of a mile from the entrance. Whoever made these paintings had to plan an expedition just to reach the canvas. Think about what that actually means. These weren't quick sketches made in passing. Someone had to carry fuel for torches or animal fat lamps that would only burn for a limited time. They had to navigate in near total darkness through spaces that could collapse, flood, or trap them. And they did all of this to paint an image that, by design, almost no one would ever see. That's not how you'd build a gallery. That's how you'd build something meant to stay hidden. Here's a detail that makes the effort even harder to explain away. Analysis of the pigments used in these paintings shows they weren't grabbed off the cave floor. Red and yellow ochre had to be mined, sometimes from sources many miles from the cave itself, then ground into fine powder, then mixed with binding agents like animal fat, blood, or plant sap to make it usable on damp rock. Some black pigments were made from manganese oxide or charred bone, prepared with a precision that suggests real expertise, passed down and practiced over time. This wasn't a casual act. It was a supply chain. Someone sourced the material, someone prepared it, someone carried it deep underground, and someone painted with it in a space they may have visited only once in their life. So if these images weren't made to be seen and admired by a crowd, what were they actually for? One of the leading theories comes from archaeologist David Lewis Williams, who spent years studying the relationship between cave art and altered states of consciousness. His research pointed to something uncomfortable for the cave paintings are just early art theory. The imagery in many of these caves closely resembles patterns reported by people in trance states. Zigzags, dots, grids, wavy lines that don't represent anything recognizable. These abstract shapes appear alongside the animal paintings in cave after cave, and they match, with striking consistency, the kinds of visual patterns the human brain generates on its own during specific altered states, whether from extreme sensory deprivation, rhythmic drumming, controlled breathing, or, in some cases, hallucinogenic plants. Lewis Williams argued that many of these caves may have functioned less like museums and more like portals, deep, dark, disorienting spaces used deliberately to induce altered states, where a shaman or spiritual practitioner would journey inward, and the paintings weren't decoration afterward. They were part of the ritual itself, sometimes touched, sometimes reworked, sometimes deliberately placed over natural bulges and cracks in the rock that the human eye reads as the shape of an animal already hiding in the stone. That detail alone is strange enough to sit with for a second. In cave after cave, painters didn't just paint on a flat surface. They used the natural contours of the rock, a bulge that already looked like a bison's shoulder, a crack that already suggested a horse's spine, as if the animal was already there, waiting to be revealed rather than invented. Some anthropologists believe this reflects something deeper than artistic technique. In many hunter-gatherer belief systems studied today, the boundary between the physical world and the spiritual world isn't solid. Rock isn't just rock. It can be a membrane, a thin barrier between this world and another one. Painting on cave walls, especially deep, dark, hard-to-reach cave walls, may have been an act of reaching through that membrane, not decorating a room. There's more evidence that this wasn't about visual display. Researchers studying hand stencils, those famous outlines made by pressing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it, have found something odd. In several sites, an unusually high number of these stencils are missing fingers or show fingers folded down in specific, repeated patterns. For decades, some assumed this reflected injury or frostbite, but the consistency of certain folded finger patterns across different caves, sometimes separated by hundreds of miles, has led some researchers to propose these weren't accidents at all. They may have been a deliberate, symbolic hand sign system, a kind of early gestural code pressed directly into rock. If that's true, it reframes the entire cave painting story. These sites weren't galleries where finished artwork was displayed to be appreciated. They were something closer to instruction manuals, ritual chambers, or communication systems built in spaces specifically chosen because they were difficult, dark, and separate from ordinary daily life. And here's the detail that ties it all together. Archaeologists have found that many of these deep chambers have unusual acoustic properties. Sound behaves strangely in them, echoing, amplifying, or resonating in ways that don't occur near the cave entrances. Some researchers have mapped painted images against these acoustic hotspots and found a correlation. The most heavily painted areas are often the same spots where sound resonates most dramatically, sometimes strong enough that a single drumbeat or chant could fill the entire chamber, like it was designed for exactly that purpose. Which raises a genuinely strange possibility. These spaces may not have been chosen for what could be seen. They may have been chosen for what could be heard, felt, and experienced by a small number of people, deep underground, in the dark, engaged in something we'd now call ritual. It's worth pausing on how much this changes the picture most of us grew up with. We were taught to imagine early humans as simple survivors, hunting, gathering, occasionally scratching pictures on a wall in idle moments. But the amount of planning, material preparation, physical risk, and acoustic precision behind these paintings suggests something closer to organized religious practice, tens of thousands of years before anything we'd recognize as a temple or a church existed. So when you picture that painter 30,000 years ago, crouched in the dark, half a mile from daylight, carefully outlining a horse no casual visitor would ever see, you're not looking at the birth of art the way we understand it. You're looking at something closer to the birth of belief itself, an early human reaching into darkness, using rock, pigment, sound, and the human body to try to touch something beyond the world they could see. We call it cave art because we don't have a better word for it, but calling it art might be the smallest, least interesting part of the story.